truly enraged. No wonder, because the traveler was supposed to be Nembutsu himself. So, as you see, Nichiren Daishonin really goes into the attack now on Nembutsu. So I think we ought to just make sure and maybe brush up on what Nembutsu really was. We've already mentioned that it was the fastest growing sect in Japan at that time, spreading like wildfire. And this, of course, was largely because of the succession of terrible disasters. And Nembutsu, in its offer of going to the land of bliss, or the pure land in the West, after death, was at least giving a glimmer of hope to the people. Indeed, some people, quite lots, committed suicide in order to get to the land of bliss ever earlier. So, miserable was their understanding of the teaching, let alone the teaching itself being virtually nonsense. The practice itself was simple. Just chant Nam Amida Butsu over and over whenever you liked. Nam Amida Butsu means I devote myself to Amida Buddha. And the teaching actually, as this says, came from China. It started in China round about the year 300 to 400 AD. And it came from China to Japan. And this man, Honen, who was born in 1133, just about 100 years on the way to it, before Nichiren Daishonin was born, he read these teachings and decided to propagate them, and founded what was called the Jodo sect. This was founded in 1175. Jodo means the pure land. So it means the pure land sect. So the teachings, the moment he began to preach them, began to spread quite strongly. That was round about the beginning of the 13th century, 1200 and something. But at that time, strangely enough, the monks and priests of the entrenched Buddhist sects, rather like they did with Nichiren Daishonin, got extremely worried and eventually succeeded in having Honen exiled. He was exiled in 1207. He came back, he was pardoned, but died shortly afterwards in 1212. But after his death, the teachings were revived, and then they really began to spread, mainly because they were appealing to the people, and therefore the government of those days, beset with so much chaos and so many problems because of these successive natural disasters, wished to calm the people down, if you like, to give them something, to keep them quiet, and at least a glimmer of hope in what would happen to them after they died. So, as you quite understand from what Nichiren Daishonin said, the main thesis of the teachings was that there were only 3 sutras for this age, that all Shakyamuni's other teachings, including the Lotus Sutra, should be abandoned, and people should only concentrate on the 3 Pure Land Sutras. The rest of Shakyamuni's teachings should be totally discarded. So Nichiren Daishonin pointed out that against the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, which says supreme teaching for the age of Mappo is the Lotus Sutra, therefore Honen was committing outright slander for his own ends. And there was not a shred of evidence to support what Honen taught. So really, Honen was an opportunist. He seized on the misery of the people at those times and decided to exploit it. And in doing so, of course, he sapped their life force. Therefore, according to Nichiren Daishonin, and according to the view of, or the Buddhist view of life, he was guilty of the greatest evil, sapping the life force of the people, in a sense deliberately, going against the teachings of the Buddha. So one may feel, well, why should Nembutsu be so important to us? There's no Jodo sect, as far as I know, in this country. But actually, of course, it has everything to do with us. In this Risho Ankokuron, the enemy, if you like, of the people's happiness is Nembutsu. But nowadays, there are many other similar enemies. In other words, Nembutsu for us is representative of all false or incomplete teachings which mislead the people and pull the wool over their eyes, isn't it? There are plenty in the world still. This is why the world is becoming more and more negative, and therefore the 3 calamities and 7 disasters are appearing more and more. Apathy and resignation is spreading far and wide, in our own country too. So Karl Marx it was who said that religion was the opium of the people. And in this sense, in relation to Nembutsu or other teachings which pull the wool over the people's eyes, that is true, isn't it? And in fact, of course, at times, even Christianity and some of the other established religions have tended to lay emphasis from time to time on something similar to the Pure Land, that is to say, heaven after death. And they haven't totally made the dogma or doctrine about heaven and what happens after death clear. Likewise, for example, a Muslim who is fighting in a holy war for Islam goes to paradise if he's killed in battle. So this is a similar sort of thing, isn't it? And of course, if you take a more modern religion, which is communism, this also is pulling the wool over the people's eyes, because they rely on propaganda. They feed only what the authorities, feel the people should hear, and do not allow freedom of speech. So this is muzzling the people, really. So one wonders, how it can be that people can be so misled. But then if people are suffering desperately and are miserable, they will, they're willing to grasp onto anything, often, unfortunately, which sounds attractive. So even the monks, for instance, that brought the teaching of Nembutsu from China to Japan, or some of the other false and erroneous teachings, those monks nevertheless were educated people. They knew, because they'd come from China, about agricultural techniques that the Japanese people had never heard of. Also about medicine, for example. Therefore, their wizardry in that respect could really win the respect of the people. And they used that knowledge in order to pull the wool over the people's eyes. Christian missionaries in Africa did a similar thing, really. They were far in advance in terms of education and knowledge to the African peasants themselves. When Captain Cook arrived in Hawaii, all the natives thought he was a god. Captain Cook was far from a god, but that's what they thought. And in the Middle Ages, for example, in our own history, in the history of Europe generally, the monks who brought religion were also scholars, and therefore again could be revered by the people for their incredible wisdom and knowledge, so-called. And today we see the same thing going on, don't we? Through television, millions, can absorb, without thinking too much, a particular slant or view of a problem. It may be totally one-sided and biased, but it can deeply affect everyone's life. So definitely through that, television can breed violence or racism, for example, depending on which way that particular television company or producer wishes to place the slant of what he's putting before the public. The classic thing of all, of course, was the terrible happening in Guyana, wasn't it? Where hundreds of people committed mass suicide following the order of a religious leader, who was just nothing else but a madman. yet they did it. And I'll never forget spending, I've often told this story, so forgive me if you've heard it, but spending a Sunday with Peter Kuhn, the leader of Germany, waiting for the next activity in Los Angeles. And we switched on the religious broadcasting sort of channels. And I'd never heard, the way these preachers were talking to their congregation. Yet the congregation was sitting there, open-mouthed, taking it all in. One man was saying, if you don't support this church with money, I assure you that the wrath of God will descend on you, etc., etc. I mean, you couldn't believe, could you, that anyone could actually believe it? But they were sitting there with their mouths open, petrified of this man. So human beings are really gullible. And without, the strong power of understanding, which is really deeply developed through our practice, of course, it's sometimes difficult for them to resist. So again, it comes back to the point that Sensei made, isn't it, that if the minds of the leaders are impure, the people's minds will be impure, and therefore the land will be impure. So this is why, of course, the main message, isn't it, of the Risho Ankokuron, the incredible importance of establishing the ultimate truth of the Gonzen. And this is why, too, that Nichiren Daishonin emphasized very, very strongly about the need for the true religion to be able to satisfy the three proofs. And the most important, he said, was actual proof, wasn't it, in this lifetime. There was absolutely no actual proof in Nembutsu. I'm sure there was no actual proof in that fearful man's sect who eventually told all his followers to commit suicide. So this is the crucial point, the actual proof in this lifetime, isn't it? So that we can prove it for ourselves. So just a few minutes left, and to go into it in a little more detail for a moment. I think it's clear now how Honen, in the words of this answer, contradicted, as Nichiren Daishonin said, the sacred teachings of Shakyamuni. And there's nothing surprising in this. Shakyamuni wouldn't have been surprised, because this was exactly what he predicted, wasn't it, 3,000 years ago, that in the age of Mappo, his pure law would be lost. And out of the chaos and misery, the great pure law would arise. So Buddhism was in a terrible state. And the monks and the priests were often more like greedy merchants or traders or even soldiers. Their concern really was for profit and power. But we saw the same in our own country in the Middle Ages. The church taking land wherever they could lay their hands on it, gaining enormous power because of that. And because of their riches, they then appeased or curried favor with the monarch by lending the monarch money. And so the power of the church spread into politics and over the people. So really, religion was impure in those days particularly. So the hangover we see still to today in the fact that the bishops have seats in the House of Lords automatically. So this is a hangover from those times when the church was so powerful. And of course, these sort of influences is what brought the ridiculous situation in World War I and II, where you had Christian priests on both sides in Germany and also in this country, who were inspiring the soldiers, also in America, to go to war, and the fact that their cause was right and so on. Yet they were on opposing sides because they were trapped in politics, in the political web. But of course, worse still, this impurity is what leads eventually, this negativity, to the 3 calamities and 7 disasters, because the people's life force is sapped and they can no longer feed it. So in medieval Japan, people turned to Nembutsu, but today they turn to all sorts of other things, don't they? Drugs, alcohol, sex, incessant music, which is a sort of drug. People walking along the street. Top volume sound to drench you with it, or mysticism and magic. All these things are attempts to escape, aren't they? And as the established religions decline, so this confusion and guilt even grows in people. So if you could just read, is it all right to go on for 3 or 4 more minutes? If you could just read page 22, John, that paragraph's important.
And now we have come to this later age, when men are no longer sages. Each enters his own dark road, and all alike forget the direct way. How pitiful that no one cures them of their blindness. How painful to see them vainly lending encouragement to these false beliefs. And as a result, everyone, from the ruler of the nation down to the humblest peasant, believes that there are no true sutras outside the 3 Pure Land Sutras, and no Buddhas other than the Buddha Amida with his 2 attendants.
Thank you. So in Sensei's lecture, he quoted from a gosho called Genkosho, which means decreasing the span of life. And in that gosho, Nichiren Daishonin explains that as human beings develop intellectually, so the evil in them grows stronger. In a way, it's natural, isn't it? And understandable. Because as intellectually they grow, their arrogance grows with it. The arrogance of conceited minds, or it can do quite easily. Of course, not in every case. And so they use the superior knowledge to gain power over others. So this is why there has to be a religious teaching that's more powerful than any knowledge, isn't it? That goes beyond knowledge or deeper than knowledge. And the greatest knowledge you can find, that religious teaching can embrace. And this is why, again, the Gohonzon is so important for Mappo. So it's all in perfect rhythm, because Shakyamuni said the Lotus Sutra couldn't be taught until the age of Mappo, because the people wouldn't have the intellectual capacity to follow it. So this is the balance, isn't it? The natural balance of life. As civilization grows, education spreads, people's intellectual minds widen, and as their arrogance and conceit and the 3 poisons begins to flow more and more because of that, so at the same time the great pure law arises, so that fearful human karma can be challenged and overcome. So this is why everything is in the rhythm of the times, just as Mappo was predicted 3,000 years ago. A stage of human development which has to be gone through. So religion, the established religions are, virtually of little use now. They don't appeal to many people. I understand Robert found a statistic somewhere, or heard that the actual number of active Christian members of the Church of England is only 1 million. The Church of England, within a population of 50-something million, that's all, the active members. Lots more, but they're inactive. It's not many. We're aiming for 1 million members at the beginning of the 21st century. So Christianity really began to fail, didn't it, when Galileo said the world was round and not flat. And the church, sadly for themselves, went on insisting that it was flat. And eventually he proved without a shadow of doubt that it was round. Even today, the Pope says contraception is evil. Even to this day, when the world is in danger of overpopulation. So Buddhism would say, people should have children with wisdom. People should have sex with wisdom. This is the way to do it. So certainly, too, these poisons spread into other areas of life, into the arts and economics and science. So in the arts, sex and violence in art, as we were talking in terms of television just now, stimulates those desires in people. In economics, the great god of profit stimulates greed, of course. And in science, science has developed now an incredible consumer society where waste is carefully planned, not redundancy, what's the word? Obsolescence is carefully planned so that, this increases profit. So in terms of the body and the shadow, society as the body has to straighten up, doesn't it? Then the shadow, which is the environment we live in, and all its problems will straighten up too. And the 3 calamities and 7 disasters will cease. So in every way, you can see or broaden one's vision what Kosen Rufu really is, of the need for this role, not just of Buddhist activities, such as going to discussion meetings and doing shakubuku. That is one aspect, isn't it, of Kosen Rufu? But the other aspect, which I talked about a lot recently, of, following a path which is your own chosen path, and within that sphere of action, bringing about change for the better in society. So really we're fortunate enough, I think, to belong to an incredible movement, and I can't help smiling whenever I think about it. And it's a grave task, incredibly important one, but I think we're so fortunate that we can do it. And also, we get unbelievable joy out of doing so. So that perhaps was seen more than anything this last AGM. And incidentally, in concluding, I really want to thank many of you as leaders were deeply up to your necks in the AGM. And it was a great AGM, the best we've ever had. And I really thank you for all you did. Thank you very much indeed. Many thanks. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.